lock the doors, turn out the lights, and climb into bed. It's time for Hillbilly Dead Time Stories.
Not all of the dead can rest in peace. Sometimes spirits linger, haunting the overgrown paths that wind through old graveyards and spooking those who dare tread upon their bones. Walking through a hushed cemetery at night with only a flashlight to guide your way can be a stirring experience. A lot of paranormal societies use graveyards for training grounds. If you've got an EMF reading in a graveyard, there's no electricity there, so it has to be coming from some other source. Oftentimes, the spirits that you may encounter in a cemetery aren't kind or frightening, but rather full of grief in this final resting place. Oddly enough, a lot of cemeteries aren't that haunted. But that is not the case with Camp Chase Confederate Cemetery. It is said that a melancholy ghost haunts the rows at Camp Chase Confederate Cemetery on the west side of Columbus, Ohio. Known as the Lady in Gray, she usually weeps quietly over the grave of one Benjamin F. Allen, a private in the 50th Tennessee Regiment, Company D. Allen's grave is number 233 out of 2,260 Confederate soldiers laid to rest in the 2-acre plot in the capital city of this very northern state. The cemetery in Columbus's hilltop neighborhood marks the place where a prisoner of war camp stood more than 140 years ago, though at the time the location was well outside the city limits. In May of 1861, a Union military training ground named Camp Jackson was established here. By July of that year, when the first prisoners were admitted, its name was changed to honor President Lincoln's Secretary of State and later Chief Justice of the United States, Hamilton County native Salmon P. Chase. At first, Camp Chase took only officers as prisoners, with enlisted men imprisoned at Fort Warren near Boston Harbor. A large number of the officers were captured during the 1862 Union victories at Fort Donelson, Tennessee, and Mississippi Island No. 10. But by the beginning of 1863, some 8,000 men of every rank were incarcerated behind the high-staked walls of the camp, necessitating the building of a stockade on Johnson's Island in Lake Erie. Most of the officers imprisoned at Camp Chase were transferred to Johnson's Island once the stockade was completed. During the smallpox epidemic of 1863, some 500 of the imprisoned soldiers died in the month of February alone. Overcrowding forced 2 and sometimes 3 men to share a single bunk, and it led to severe shortages in food, medicine, clothing, and even blankets. Malnourished and cold, the men were highly susceptible to disease. Near the end of that deadly year, a cemetery was built at the camp. As a result, the Confederate dead who had been buried in the city cemetery were moved back to Camp Chase, buried under a cheap wooden marker in a plot surrounded by a low fence. When the war ended in 1865, most of Camp Chase itself was dismantled. Some of the cabins where POWs had been housed were used as shanties for a few years, but for the most part, every trace of Camp Chase would soon be gone, except for the graveyard, which was left to deteriorate until it was restored and used as a gathering place for patriotic speeches in the 1890s. Today, the small cemetery is picturesque and well maintained. Its wooden headstones have been replaced with granite. Its centerpiece is an arch constructed from granite blocks. Atop the arch stands the statue of a Confederate soldier facing south, and on the keystone below his feet is engraved a single word: Americans. But who exactly is the Gray Lady? So many men died miserably here at a young age that it's surprising that the lady in gray is the only ghost who haunts the place. She is described by witnesses as wearing a flowing gray dress and a gray veil hiding her face. Is she Benjamin Allen's Tennessee bride, weeping over the reunion that never happened? Visitors to the cemetery and even those passing by gates have reported seeing the woman walking among the seemingly endless line of headstones. Once in a while, she is even seen walking through the locked cemetery gates at night. But more often than not, she's spotted standing over two specific graves, that of Benjamin Allen and one of an unknown soldier. Researchers of the paranormal have yet to figure out who the ghostly woman is and why she chooses to mourn where she does. She doesn't appear to be the spirit of any known relative of Mr. Allen's, and her concern for any unknown soldier further compounds the mystery. Perhaps the lady in gray isn't connected to these graves at all, but is simply eternally mourning the atrocities of war in general. Cemeteries have long been viewed as spooky, mostly due to the mysterious nature of death. Graveyards and tombs have provided the setting for countless tales of ghosts, devils, and crimes, leading many to fear cemeteries as haunted places filled with danger. The subject of death is uncomfortable to most people. Maybe, just maybe, the lady in gray will ease your anxiety about going to a cemetery.
Hush, little baby, don't say a word, or Daddy has to fight off a zombie herd. And once that zombie herd is dead, Daddy has to hack off the devil's head. And if that devil's head gets hacked, Daddy has to hunt down a werewolf pack. And when that werewolf pack goes down, Daddy has to slaughter an evil clown. And after the evil clown is killed, Daddy has to take on a vampire guild.